Hello, everyone. We just visited with all three of Notre Dame's coordinators, as well as all team captains, CJ Carr and Jordan Faison. This is the Irish Illustrated Instant Analysis brought to you by the RVMH Hall of Fame and the Northern Indiana Events Center in lovely Elkhart, Indiana. He's the vet, Tim Prister. He's Drew Mentock, host of Irish Illustrated Interviews, and this is a new feature that we're excited to bring to you, not just tonight, but hopefully throughout this season, an extra instant analysis after all of our Tuesday availabilities. Tim, I want to start with you. Really nice to get to visit with all three coordinators today. We talked with Chris Ash first, so I'll start there. What are some of the things that stood out to you from Coach Ash as he makes his return to college as a defensive coordinator?
He does, and the first topic that was brought up to him was, with regard to the rules changes, and I know you want to talk about that. Maybe we can talk about that in Irish Illustrated Insider on Thursday. But the defense can be called for defensive delay if they fake jumping off, trying to get offensive linemen to jump. I asked Drake Bowen, well, what if you're just trying to jump the snap count? And he was kind of perplexed as to how they would call that. So just to let fans know a little bit about a couple of the rule changes, that's why we'll address it a little bit further tomorrow.
Yeah, and you also asked him a good question about some of the tougher environments that he's been in, and I found his comments there very interesting. I'll add on the rule thing, it's defensive false starts. As crazy as that sounds, college athletics, college football is now calling a defensive false start penalty. We will have more of that on the podcast Thursday. I'll try to share a story that I wrote as well on the message board. But Tim, I thought Coach Asser's comments about some of the difficult places he's played were really interesting.
Yeah, I asked him about Arkansas because I don't know when we're going to get him again. I meant to ask him about that recently. But, there are a lot of tough places to play. And clearly Miami is one. We know that, we asked CJ Carr about dealing with silent counts, and he's never done it in a game before. Didn't do it in high school, but they said they've worked on it and he feels comfortable doing it. I'm changing the subject here on you, JB, but CJ Carr just strikes me. We've heard about what a confident kid he is and a motivator amongst teammates, and it took about 30 seconds of the interview. He felt like, hey, I worked hard enough. Like he was asked whether he thought he was going to win the job, knew he was going to win the job, and he just confidently said, I've worked my butt off, and I pretty much expected it to happen, yeah.
Drew, you had some great questions for both CJ and offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock specific about CJ. What are some of the elements there that stood out to you, and particularly when you were talking to CJ about some of the conversations he's had with Riley Leonard and some of the others?
Yeah, I think something that really jumped out to me is just kind of talking to him through this process of, fall camp. It's a time where you should be able to make mistakes. You're trying to do new things, and I think early on especially, he maybe struggled to balance that a little bit in terms of like, well, am I going to try and push the ball here? Am I going to try and fit it in this tight window? He named Leonard more specifically. Obviously, that's a tough guy to get the ball in between. So I think he said he really feels like he balanced that, and maybe that's something that really helped him win over the job, is if once he figured out, okay, this is when I can make mistakes. This is when I need to kind of focus in and really make the right decision. And I think that was a really significant thing he talked about. And I think he also talked about as soon as he won the job, he called Riley Leonard to talk about that and kind of pick his brain. And Riley's obviously a guy who went through it all last year. He went through the highest of highs, and he went through a point where we're standing outside the stadium right now. He asked a police officer for a ride home after Northern Illinois. So he's a guy who I'm sure he'll lean on a lot. He also mentioned Ian Book, who's in town right now. So it sounds like he's already kind of speaking to the former Notre Dame quarterbacks to kind of get prepared for what he's going to experience.
Tying into Riley Leonard, because what do you call it? Riley meets that Riley Leonard used to meet with Mike Denbrock, extra sessions, just to talk about the plays that he's most comfortable with, etc. And that's exactly what CJ Carr and Mike Denbrock have been doing.
Yeah, first thing in the morning is something that Riley Leonard instituted with Mike Denbrock a year ago for those very reasons, to make sure everybody's on the same page. Hey, Coach, this is what I like. What do you like? Why do you like that? Here's why maybe I'm not as comfortable with that. So somebody asked him, said, so are those meetings then featuring coffee and bagels? And he said, no, country music and football. And I think that gave you an idea of how seriously he's approaching this, but he did not at all seem uptight. I noticed the same as you. He did not walk upstairs, I don't want to say with a swagger, but I would call it a command presence. And that's one thing I think we've heard a lot about him, TP, and you might have some more additional insight on that with some of your conversations in recent days.
I just think that that's who this kid is, and it was brought up because Marcus Freeman mentioned it the other day that, you've got to be careful with him because, he wants to make big plays, and not every play is a bomb play, so to speak. And he kind of got a kick out of that and said, I have to rein in a little bit that big play mentality, but you don't want to rein it in too much, and I'm sure he won't. When the opportunity's there, Mike Denbrock said, you don't want to give him too. I think you might have asked JB. You don't want to put too much on his plate, the weight of the world on him. But I think when it comes down to it at Miami on Sunday night, I think CJ Carr is going to be ready to do whatever Mike Denbrock asks him to do.
We're jumping around here, but we're going to stick with CJ Carr for a little bit longer just because that's obviously a command topic as we talk about his command presence on this special edition of Irish Illustrated Instant Analysis with Tim Prister and Drew Mentock. And Drew, I wanted to come back to you. You got to ask Mike Denbrock some specific questions about what he had seen from CJ and just sort of the way the process was navigated, and you were over there for a good bit of that. What are some of the elements that Coach Denbrock stood out, that he said about CJ that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think he really talks about that confidence and just like how important that is and how he carries himself. And he feels like he's somebody who he can be hard on. And he said he struggles with that at times where maybe he overlooks the learning opportunity.
He's not a guy, I don't pat guys on the back when they do something wrong.
Right. And he mentioned that he's better at that with his own son than he is with maybe his players, but he said that's a positive with CJ because I don't think CJ ever takes anything personally. So I think that was really significant. And we talked a little bit about that overconfidence that Marcus Freeman mentioned yesterday, and how do you kind of balance that going into this game where you want him to have that confidence to go out there knowing he can do it, but also play within the game plan in something, which is Mike Denbrock has mentioned, like he's going to tailor this offensive game plan to his strengths, so you don't want him to kind of go outside of that. And Mike Denbrock said, it's going to be a challenge, but it's something you got to like kind of delicately balance, and we'll see how well they do that on Sunday.
There'll be a little bit more of the written word coming out on CJ Carr, certainly from Drew as well as myself in some different spots. A couple of things I want to add about CJ before coming to you, Tim, and maybe talking about a Don Schuler. I think I saw you spending some time.
I was not.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's all right. We'll get around to some of the others. But two quick things on CJ Carr that really resonated with me. And then I've been hearing about this incomplete pass in spring camp that he had for a long time where he rolls to his left and threads the ball through this unbelievable window, makes a throw that nobody thinks he can make. And it's so stunning that the receiver dropped what would have been a touchdown, but everybody came out of that practice and said, holy smokes, can you believe that throw? So I got to ask Emil Wagner, hey, is this throw a real thing? Did it happen? He goes, oh, it's a real thing. As a matter of fact, I've seen it more than once. His arm talent is special. He does stuff like that, but I know the moment you're talking about. I thought that was really interesting. The last thing I'll add, and then I'll come to you, TP, is I've heard since last year about this giant cookout that CJ Carr threw for his teammates, even though he had no prayer of playing last year. And I happened to be at Costco right after CJ Carr had been at Costco with his mother, and they bought like $500 worth of food. And the cashier just happened to mention to me that's, oh, you just missed CJ Carr. He was here with his mom. They're throwing a big cookout. So I asked Emil Wagner about that, and he said, yeah, he did that. He cooked for everybody. They threw this big spread. That's the guy that he is. One of the players' birthday was recently. He said, hey, just come over. We'll watch NFL exhibition games. Had the whole team over.
Well, that's CJ Carr, and that's the leadership. And you talk about some pinpoint passes. We've seen a couple. We saw one in the Jersey scrimmage in 2024, which I've said before, took my breath away. And I think everybody saw the two passes, the sideline passes to the tight ends that he threw in the 2025 spring game. So we're spending a lot of time talking about CJ Carr, but he's the man. And I think we're all just really looking forward to see what he can do when the bright lights are on.
For sure. And he did give Leonard Moore a lot of praise, but he also said, Drew, like, hey, but Malachi Fields, we have that guy that can match up with Leonard Moore now, by the way. He just wanted to send that message. Who are some of the other players or coaches that you got to visit with today, Drew, and what are some of the notes that stood out to you?
Yeah, I talked to both offensive linemen that are captains, Emil Wagner and Billy Strouth. I thought it was interesting just to see their kind of perspective on, how important it is to protect the quarterback, especially when it's a young guy. I'm sure early on, like, they wanted to get him in there, and ideally he doesn't, get pressured too much and kind of settle into the game. So I think they're very aware of that challenge, and those are two experienced guys. And I talked to Emil Wagner about Gerby Lambert, and he talked about, he's somebody who's backed him up before. Now he's, very likely going to be the starting right guard on Sunday, playing next to Emil Wagner. And he just talked a lot about how, he saw him put in the effort. Obviously, he had the injury in the spring, but he got his weight right. He did all these other little things that maybe, we see the 5-star caliber talent, but he did all the other little things to get himself in this position. And that's really what stood out to Emil. He didn't even really talk about the talent per se.
Tim, some of the other people that you got to visit with.
Will Pauling. I'm on transcription duty with him today. Really an engaging guy. And, he was a captain at Wisconsin. I asked him did you expect to be named captain here? He said he wouldn't necessarily say that, but he knew that he brought something to the receivers room, and it was, mainly experience and age. Malachi Fields wasn't here in the spring, and Will Pauling was, so he got a jump on it. So he says, hey, look, I don't take this honor lightly. He's very honored to be a captain. And then talking to Jordan Faison, he won the punt return job. And, he says, hey, he didn't say it maybe as cocky as this is about to sound, but he said, I'm the prototype guy for the job. Good hands, receiver with good hands. Tremendous speed. So he's really looking forward to it. I asked him if he's caught punts in the rain, which is a possibility in Miami Sunday night. He said in high school, of course, playing in Florida, he absolutely did.
Yeah, this game, obviously another homecoming for Jordan Faison, much like the Orange Bowl was, and I would imagine his family will be there along with Notre Dame commit Dylan Faison, who's already launched his 2025 prep season with a lot of positive things. One more quick note from Chris Ash. I thought that our colleague Tim O'Malley asked a great question about how you handle the rotation, and you obviously wouldn't have a rotation if you don't believe in those guys, but does it impact how you want to call the game at certain times? Like, you want to be running this play, but maybe you just sub somebody out and the personnel's not the same. And Chris Ash just said, look, man, if they don't know the package, if they can't run the package as well as the guy we just took off the field, they're probably not going to be on the field. And I think that tells you a little bit about how demanding his standards are. Another quick note from Emil Wagner as we discussed the leadership of this team today. He talked very openly about how he was asked about Marcus saying that early in camp he didn't think the guys were being vocal enough and he was having to get on teammates more or get on the players more because the teammates weren't getting on their peers as much. And Emil said, I took that to heart, and we were having a bad practice where Scout just wasn't giving us the looks we need, and I lit into them. And I said, what was their response? And he said, we came back the next day and had one of the best practices we've ever had, and they absolutely got after our butts, and everything was so much better from that point forward. Finally, from me, and then I'll get final thoughts from you guys and we'll wrap it up. One more quick thing on rules changes. I jokingly asked Marty Biaggi, I said, hey, are you taking credit? Do you want this referred to as the Biaggi rule? Because among those rule changes, the NCAA has officially banned the touchdown that should have stood, by the way, by Jack Kaiser in the game against Virginia. Now there's new rules about punt formations and how many people you can have behind the line of scrimmage, and only one person can be designed to catch the football from the center. And we'll have more on that on Irish Illustrated, but I'm calling it the Biaggi rule. I thought I would share that with you all. Drew, your final thoughts on all of our visits today?
Yeah, I didn't get to spend much time with Chris Ash, but I did listen to Mario Cristobal's press conference a little bit, and I do think I just want to add, I think we make a lot about how Notre Dame has to look at all these transfers. We're looking at Minnesota film last year, and Mario Cristobal is talking about the same with Chris Ash, where he's going in and he's looking at Texas film, going to Rutgers, going to Ohio State. So
Wisconsin.
I think Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So I think it was interesting to see their perspective is also similar, where they're looking at this wide body of work with him too. And I think it'll be really interesting how similar the defense actually is to what Al Golden run, and how much they're actually going to pull from Notre Dame, that is, from the last decade or so of Chris Ash's career.
Closing thoughts from you, TP.
Yeah, a couple things from the offensive lineman. Again, getting back to Emil Wagner, talking about CJ Carr's their little brother, and they've got to protect him, and they got to give him, an opportunity to take advantage of some easy reads. So big brother's taking care of little brother. And Billy Schrouth, I think we all know that he's wound pretty tight on game day, and he talked about, he was asked, first of all, left or right guard, and he said he doesn't really care one way or another. But he was asked about leadership, how he leads. And he basically said, I will paraphrase, leadership equals competing. And he competes at a high level, whether it's on the field or in the weight room with Lauren Lando. So as we're wrapping up here, I think we come out of this 11-person interview feeling pretty good about the leadership of Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I'll cap it with this on a leadership note because I got to visit some with Drake Bowen. And, of course, he's going to be the primary green dot for the Notre Dame defense, an element that he said he really liked and did note that he felt like they had practiced everything that they possibly could with that green dot communication over the course of camp, every situation imaginable, communicating effectively. So if something happens and you can't communicate, they've got adjustments there. I thought that was interesting. I asked him about leadership. I said, I talked to you in the locker room after the national championship loss, and you told me that night you'll start leading. I said, I've heard about some breakfasts and some other things that you've done. What have you done along the way? He's hosted these breakfasts. He's hosted these other events with players, not just with his linebackers, with anybody that wants to join him as he's developed his leadership and as he's tried to form a team bond. He said, that's just it. We just want to have a team bond. That's what everything is geared for. So, again, this has been a special edition of Irish Illustrated Instant Analysis, one we intend to bring to you now weekly throughout the rest of the season. For the vet, Tim Priester. For Drew Mentock, I'm John Brice. This has been Irish Illustrated Instant Analysis, brought to you by the RV Manufacturers Hall of Fame in Northern Indiana Event Center in absolutely sublime Elkhart, Indiana.